has taken a look at that proposal and have some views that they would like to provide to us to better inform us of some of the challenges and thoughts they have on making that type of adjustment. So I think Ian and Steve are going to provide their thoughts to us jointly.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, after the conclusion of the meeting, Bruce and Ian and I sat down and sort of posed this problem, this proposal into sort of 2 points. What is it we can do now before the annual meeting? And then the second slide that we'll show you later is more along the lines of what we think should be done to properly do the analysis that was requested by the commissioners yesterday. And so we've put down a few bullet points. We'll just go over here and sort of justify each of these points to you. The first one is we could use this simple equilibrium model that I showed yesterday in our presentation with the area-specific size at age data. Right now that model is set up where it's just using the coast-wide average mean size at age, but we could go in and use this model and put the area-specific size at age data that we have from our setline survey and do a similar analysis that we did during our MSE process and MSAB process. It's sensitive to a number of assumptions, namely that we don't know what the fishery selectivity will do in response to a change in size limits, but we can certainly make those changes and look at how sensitive the problem is to that particular issue. With respect to the size at age information, that would all come from our setline survey, and that should be straightforward. I'll let Ian speak to the other data points.
So right now, the information that or the assumptions that we make about sublegal, the size distribution of sublegal age and size distribution of sublegal discards comes from our setline survey. We get, in Area 2B, we get a piece count, so we have some validation of how many sublegal fish are being handled, but we don't have from any data set direct observations of the size frequency of those fish. We may be able to get some small amount of data for the portion of the fleet that's covered by the North Pacific Observer Program, but that coverage is pretty low and doesn't cover a large portion of the small boat part of our fleet. So based on that survey information, one of the things that we can look at is we can look at the ratio of U32 to O32, which is what we do now to estimate what the wastage is likely to be, and we can compare that to the ratio of U30 to O30 and see whether there would be a projected savings there in terms of retaining those fish. How much, what proportional reduction in fish that are being handled could actually be retained in that case. Again, it's just using the survey data, and to cut right to the last bullet point here, one of the things that we can also look at is the spatial distribution of those patterns. So we use the survey to infer how many sublegal fish are being encountered, but there's quite a lot of spatial variability in there. And the degree of spatial variability will potentially give us a sense of how much different the response in the fishery might be relative to the survey. For example, if there are parts of a certain regulatory area that have a very high rate of sublegals and other parts that have a very low rate, it suggests that depending on where the fishery chooses to go, their effective selectivity on very small fish could be very, very different. In contrast, if there's very little spatial variability in that, then it wouldn't really matter where the fishery goes. We would expect the fishery to sort of track what the survey is doing. So we can make those comparisons based on the survey data. The last bullet there is really just to identify, we've only had overnight to really think about this, but just to try to identify all the important points, all the things we would want to measure to be able to present to you guys to compare. So there's some of these variables would be the number of fish handled, the amount of mortality associated with that, and you'll see there's several of our points on the next page are identifying certain items that we think would be important, that would be worth further analysis. But what we could present to you in January would be a summary of a variety of those points. So those are, I think that's a quick summary of what we could probably do quickly between now and the annual meeting in January. Maybe we should just do the whole thing.
Can you tell me the next slide, Tom? Oh, I have the next slide. As you can see, the font gets smaller when we start talking about what we think should be done to do a proper analysis on this slide. The basic message here is that the current harvest policy was developed and based on a 32-inch size limit. And this first bullet point, Ian and I both commented yesterday, is really a PhD thesis in terms of the scope of the amount of work that needs to be done. And it's to look at a harvest policy based on a 30-inch size limit. This is really necessary because the control rules that were put in place was designed to, based on a 32-inch size limit. The sensitivity analysis would be necessary in terms of looking at and trying to understand how responses in the fishery in terms of selectivity would impact our current policy, and also the potential impacts of high grading, full retention, and other combinations. Also, this has been done before by Bill Clark and Anna Parma by looking at the standard yield per recruit analysis to see if we're getting anywhere close to having some sort of potential risk for growth overfishing, where we start harvesting these fish at a stage before they reach their biomass peak, and then also looking at the spawning potential ratio metrics as we're doing now. That being said, a lot of these points could also be done with the current 32-inch. A lot of these points are still valid under our 32-inch size limit with changes in size at age. So I think in either case, this process has to be done, whether the size limit changes to 30 inches or remains the same at 32 inches.
So moving from there, I mean that really is a question about the blue line and what would the analog be to the blue line with a 30-inch size limit. And I guess Steve and I have spent quite a bit of time yesterday evening and this morning trying to think about which parts of that may or may not be intuitive. And it's not clear based on a change in sex ratio potentially in the catch. It's not clear exactly what would and wouldn't be conservative relative to current catch limits. It's under some assumptions you would expect to reduce the harvest rate if you reduce the minimum size limit. However, there are potential changes in sex ratio that may alter that. And really, without doing the analysis, it's difficult to say what would constitute a conservative approach and or what would be an analog to the current blue line. And that's just with regard to the total magnitude of harvest. The second issue is the next bullet here, which is what to do about apportionment. So right now we apportion the stock. We look at the distribution of O32 fish in our survey, and we apply our target harvest rates to that to generate the catch levels. It would seem, at first glance, it would seem logical to apportion based on O30, and that would lead to pretty dramatically different distribution of stock and catch levels, I think, based on the relative difference among regulatory areas. However, that also presupposes some change or some response in fishery selectivity. For example, if fishery selectivity didn't change at all, and in fact, if the fishery actively avoided fish in the 30 to 32-inch range, there would be the potential to take a greater yield in some areas out of the larger fish, which may not be precautionary at all. Again, really the trouble is that these things are not necessarily intuitive, and without doing the analysis, it's difficult for us to give you a sense of which direction they might go. The next point is really looking forward to, okay, if you did this, at the end of the first year, what could we tell you about what happened? And currently, we don't have any data coming in other than a small amount of observer coverage that would tell us what the response in the fishery was, even after a year with different size limits. And so we would essentially be making the same assumptions a year from now and have very little ability to tell you whether it was working or not. There would be some empirical validation in the trends themselves about what was happening, but it may take several years to really get a sense in an indirect manner of how a change in the size limit would play out. The next couple of points really are just outlining some of the things that would be worth looking at. One is the distribution of injury categories by size. So for the directed fishery, we're assuming that on average 16% of those fish die after they've been handled, sublegal fish. If there is a relationship between the discard mortality rate and the size of fish being discarded, and we dramatically change the average size of discard because now there are no 31-inch fish being discarded, that may correspond to a change in the realized discard mortality rate. Again, that's an analysis that we would need to do to try and inform, and this would get at really how much savings are we getting, potentially getting from a change in size limit. We already talked a little bit about potential impacts of changes in the size composition of the catch. There's no question that there are a large number of males that are right around that legal size limit, and so it is quite likely that we would see a change in the sex, that there would be a change in the sex ratio of the catch. Again, we wouldn't see it because we're not getting information on the sex of the commercial catch, even currently. That's something we're working on developing a program for, but wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you after a year, yeah, look, now you're getting a whole lot more males in the catch. And then finally, you know, the Commission, Steve and I have been at the Commission for 3 years now, almost 3 years, and but there's been an extensive amount of work done on size limits in the past. Some of it is somewhat dated because of the changes in size at age, but personally I don't feel comfortable summarizing all the work that's already been done, and it would really be worthwhile to go back rather than reinventing the wheel and look at some of the work that Anna and Bill and other people have done along the way and make sure that we haven't missed anything that's already been looked at. So those are the broader considerations, which are, you know, probably more on the scope of something that we could get done over a year or two, realizing that if we were working on this, that we wouldn't be working on other things that we're already intending to do. Everything would be a trade-off there. So that's just trying to provide you guys not necessarily with a conclusion about whether size limits would or wouldn't, change in size limits would or wouldn't be a good idea, but just some of the points for consideration that we've been able to come up with in 12 hours.
All right, thanks very much, Steve and Ian. I suspect there'll be some questions or comments from the commissioners, and I'll just see if there are. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you had 12 hours. You did a good job. Thank you very much for putting that together. So I have a few minutes here, so I have some miscellaneous thoughts that are not well ordered. So let me stumble through a couple of them. But I think from my point of view, and perhaps all the U.S. Commissioners' side, we are really looking at this not as an opportunity to increase productivity for the directed, increase harvest for the directed fishery, or for the, at all. It's not an opportunity to make more money on your boat this year. The idea is to relieve some of the burden on the population that we see taking place because of the sorting and handling of the 30 to 32-inch fish. We know that we think only 16% die, but when we see areas where there are 60 and 70% of the fish in that size range that come up have prior hook injuries, it seems likely that many of those are hooked more than one time, and we don't know whether it's 16% die the first time and only 16% again the second time, or if it's multiple. And so the idea is to relieve some of that burden on that size category of fish if those are marketable. And so with that thought in mind, it's not about getting more fish for the fishermen to catch right now. We wouldn't see a reason to, say, re-estimate the biomass of 30 and up and apply an exploitation rate to that, calculate the biomass of 32 up and stay with our harvest policy, and then if you can market the fish you catch between 30 and 32, I understand that you need to do the math and run the models, but I'm guessing that's going to be a conservative approach. If you stop throwing away those fish, you market those, it's one less or two less fish above 32 that you don't have to kill. So that's the perspective that I see. And of course I understand that we don't have a data framework in place to start immediately collecting all the data we would need to see the changes in the fishery relative to the 32-inch size limit. But the data supporting a 32-inch size limit along those same parameters also has never been collected. We've had it for 27 years. We still don't know these data that we would like to have in place in order to compare the effect of changing to 30 inches. So I can't see that as a reason not to move forward in what I think is primarily intended as a conservation measure for the resource, not a boon for the directed fishery at all, but a way that we think would eliminate some mortality on that size class of fish. I'll stop there if I could, Mr. Chairman. On the apportionment thing, again, I think that's a good point, that maybe in some areas there's a lot more 30 to 32-inch fish than in other areas. So if you're apportioning based on the 30-inch and up distribution, you'd probably change the apportionment by area. But again, if the goal is really a 32-inch up fishery, but only allowing marketing on 30 to 32, I don't think you change the apportionment until you did the homework and figured out whether it makes sense to have different exploitation rates based on a 30 up. But we're not I would suggest not abandoning the harvest policy based on 32 and up right now, and thus you would not change the apportionment, so there wouldn't be dramatic changes. Wouldn't be any change from one area to the other. There might be a little different change in, for example, in 3B, if there's more 30 to 32-inch fish there, the harvest would probably be slightly different, because if they took advantage of the opportunity to market 30 to 32, you'd probably get more in 3B than you would get in 4A. And so there'd be slight changes, but I think that's just lost in the uncertainty. Again, if you stay with the goal that we have now, largely a 32-inch up fishery, but allowing the opportunity to land them, I don't think you have to reapportion. So I don't think the industry has to be frightened by what percentage comes from their area based on changing the 30 size limit. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. I thought that basically echoes my views and the Canadian commissioners as well, thinking about why we're putting this forward, at least for consideration. It's about a conservation move to reduce the impact on the smaller fish, and not looking to increase the harvest at this time. Maybe it's after some of the points that you and Ian have raised about some of the work and data that needs to be collected. Maybe it leads to a different conclusion on the harvest policy. I guess logically, what we're saying is the eBio would not change, and the harvest rate would not change, and so we're still impacting the resource the same, but saving some of the mortality. And I think you've raised some good points about data that needs to be collected, and maybe what it is a two-stage process. If this is the way that we end up going, is that a work plan is developed to think about what the impact, what's needed to be collected, how it would be collected, what the cost of collecting that information. But some of the points that Jim raised as well is, but we haven't collected this in the past, and not that we really want to always repeat the past. We've made changes to size limits in the past, and some of them quite significantly, with a lot less information. So I'm not proposing that we do that either, but I do think when we get back together at the annual meeting that we would have hopefully some more information from the Commission staff about what their views are in the proposal, and staging it over a couple of years. And I mean, this is all consistent, I would say, with the work that we've been doing within the MSAB as well, just that maybe the time frame is accelerated slightly. I'll see if there's any other questions or comments from the commissioners. Bob?
Through the chair, either Steve or Ian, is there one of these bullets in the what we think should be done that would lead us to a discussion of whether or not the size limit should fluctuate with size at age?
Yeah, the first bullet, the current harvest policy was developed at a time when size at age was much larger than it is now, and I believe the last time the 32-inch size limit was reevaluated, it was done during a period when the size at age was probably at its peak. We've had in the past size limits that were 26 inches, I believe, was the minimum size limit. So it's consistent with the idea that, you know, if size at age is changing and getting smaller, it could, and if it continued to go to a point, it could be that halibut never grow beyond 32 inches, and we'd never have a fishery. So of course, you would expect size at age and size limits to co-vary with each other. But again, it really depends on the objective of the fishery.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Is there any online?
I have one. Yes, sir. I have one comment online from Buck Lavkidis. Sorry if I've got your name incorrectly, but he notes that, or questions, has anyone read Valero and Hare 2011 analysis of lowering the size limit? This isn't new. I believe that's the one that you referred to, Bruce. And then second one, how about an analysis of the millions of pounds of bycatch lifted off the bottom by factory longliners in 4 CDE? Looks like the entire biomass of the area is caught multiple times a year. Should the mortality rate be 16%?
Thanks very much, Steve. Are there any questions or comments that people in the room want to make in the audience? Come on up, Bruce. Yep. Yeah, come to the mic, please.
Hello, I'm Bruce Gabris. I guess I'm representing myself on this comment. And also, I'm a member of the MSAB board, so we've been talking about this size at age, not size at age, but size for harvest for quite some time, and the industry has been talking about it for a long time. I'm curious to wonder, back in the 70s when the limit was set to 32 inches, whether or not the commission or the commissioners did this much analysis before they decided we have a problem then, and they increased the size to 32 inches. And that's not to say that that we shouldn't have the appropriate analysis, but I see two things, just very briefly, is that if the number that we would reduce handling of these fish by 58%, if we go from 32 to 30, that's a very appealing number to do that. That seems to be would be a big savings, and that's what came out in the MSAB when we worked with Dr. Martell's modeling about how much that would impact the fishery. So that's a very appealing point. Two items that appear to keep coming up that we don't have information on is, number one, how would the harvester behavior change if we reduce the size of the fish to 30 inches? Some speculation that nothing would change, and I happen, as a harvester, I happen to be in that camp. I wouldn't change anything in the way I fish. And the second one, and then some say that, maybe that they're going to target these fish, which, we aren't going to know that unless you have an opportunity to try to at least give the opportunity to let harvesters do what they're going to do. And the second point that seems to come up that we don't have information on is, what would the market reaction be to the smaller fish? Because we're talking 10 pounds and less now relative to where we are now, 10, 20s at the small end. So I would support 32-inch limit or 30-inch limit relative to the 32 if it was done on a limited period of time, and as a minimum it'd probably have to be a 2-year test period, and possibly if scientific data gathering or marketing would take more than that, maybe 3 years, but someplace between 2 and 3 years. And Commissioner Balsinger's comment about not changing the apportionment, I think, is important because that really reduces the risks to the industry and to the biomass if you're not all those items that were just mentioned here earlier. If those items were if you didn't change the apportionment, I can't see how that would necessarily reduce the, would affect the science of it, because it seems it would be a benefit and a conservative measure to the fishery versus taking a riskier position. I would say that I'm a 3A harvester, that with smaller fish in 3A relative to southeast, that if you did the reapportionment, we'd probably get a bigger chunk of the pie. And that perhaps is a reason why people wouldn't want to consider that, because quite frankly, we probably don't have the appropriate information to make that kind of analysis to see if there is a benefit. So with that, I guess I'd just end it that if we did it for a limited duration, and I think that's important, the harvesters know that and the marketers know that this is a test case, and if it's not going to check the it's not going to change the analysis, the blue line, the apportionment, I see minimal risk to doing that for a period of time.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Are there any other comments in the room or questions? No? Oh, Don.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I'm out of order here. Out of the order. I had a couple questions for Ian and Dr. Martell. I understand a reduced size limit may affect different regions in different ways because of the significant population of this 30 to 32 inch size. Example, possibly southeast or 2A, not 2A, but 2B and 2C may not be as impacted because of the population of the smaller fish isn't as great as possibly 3B, where it's assumed that there's a much larger population of these smaller fish. And I was looking for Mr. Gabriel's referred to the 58% touches. It seems clear to me that in possibly 3B in areas where there's large populations of small fish, that might even be a larger number in that region than the 58. If you averaged it over coast-wide, it might even be a higher number than 58%. But I'm looking under the commercial wastage in the stock assessment, and of 026, it says there's a 500,000 pounds. I'm just guessing how many fish that we might be saving by retaining. I know it's 026, not 030, but of that 500,000 pounds, that's calculated backwards to using the 16% mortality. What kind of math would you get to how many fish that might be? And I know it's total speculation. I'm trying to get a sense for marketing folks. Would be different in 2C as opposed to 3B. They may be seeing a lot higher percentage of smaller fish coming in on the boats than other areas. I think 3A would be more balanced, possibly. So any thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, so there are several questions and points in there, I think. And it's getting to the second bullet on what we probably could do between now and the annual meeting, which is that we could look at the potential savings with regard to what we see in the distribution of survey catches. So right now we calculate wastage based on O32, U32. We could recalculate that based on U30 and O30 and see how much difference there would be in that projection. I can't tell you whether it would be on the order of 50%. What I can tell you is it will vary dramatically across regulatory area. So in just some ballpark numbers, because I don't have them sitting in front of me here, but a place like Area 4B, we see lots of observations of survey stations that are running around 20% sublegal by number. Contrast to Area 3B, where we're seeing over 70% on median survey station, and in some cases, some stations, it's even over 80% sublegal. So the effect of this will be very different in different regulatory areas. Primarily, I think you'll see the biggest difference in the Western Gulf. One thing Steve and I were just discussing here, still thinking about it, is whether or not sticking with the current catch limits would or wouldn't be precautionary. even if there's some savings, you're going for the 30 and 31-inch fish, you would be going from a 16% mortality to 100% mortality on those fish. They'd be part of the catch, and so there'd be some fish that wouldn't be caught there. You could imagine if we were talking about 10-inch halibut, for example, they would have a lot of growth left to go, and at some point it would be very clear that you were catching them before they had a chance to grow. Yield per recruit just looks at how much weight the fish is putting on relative to its chance of dying at any given time. And the peak of the yield per recruit is where you get the most amount of biomass for a particular fish. You're catching it when it's, on average, going to have grown as big as it's going to get, offset by the probability of dying at any given time. So you would expect, as you shift the size limit lower, that you would want to apply a lower harvest rate to compensate for the fact that you might be growth overfishing at some point. However, we have for halibut, because it's always more complicated than the average fish, we also have the sex ratio difference. So probably the sex ratio of the catch is going to shift because there's a higher proportion of males in some of these smaller categories. And so neither Steve or I is comfortable giving you a prediction about whether sticking with the same catch limits in the same blue line is or isn't necessarily precautionary given a change in size limit. It may be, but I can't tell you for sure in that case. But we will be able to summarize some of the information from the survey, so you can get a sense of what the savings, assuming the survey is a good proxy, what the savings might be in various regulatory areas. And it is, I think you're right, primarily going to be in the Western Gulf.
Did you have a follow-up, Don?
I just want to thank you for the discussion there. Thank you.
All right. So just to wrap up this particular agenda item, how do we want to proceed as far as agreeing on a way forward? I think we as commissioners want to see this on the agenda for the annual meeting, and what I see in the 4 bullets of what we can do now is what I would assume we would see at the annual meeting or before. And you may have some other thoughts between now and then that would flesh this out as well. I suspect you would, given you've only had 12 hours, 15 minutes. So, I mean, seriously, you know, I think I do, as Don says, appreciate you bringing forward these points and your concerns. And I think there's more to come on this, obviously, and we'll hear from others at the annual meeting about their views as well that have not had a chance to think fully about this and would like to come forward and provide their views, whether they think this is a good idea or a bad idea and the reasons why. And so we'll have it on the agenda for the annual meeting and get some further information from Ian and Steve, and I think probably just leave it there unless the commissioners have anything else to say. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I presume that there's a chance that either the PAG or the conference board would be able to educate us a little bit on their thinking on this as well. So that, coupled with, as you said, the public input that we might get, I think will inform us for a decision.
Right. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Jim. Bruce, you okay? Yeah. All right, then we'll go back to our regularly scheduled agenda, and I think we're now moving on to the survey expansion and options and alternatives that Ray is going to provide. Ray Webster is going to provide the presentation.
Good morning. Is that audible? Okay, thank you. So I'll be talking mainly about our proposal for a full expansion of the setline survey into waters that we haven't been regularly surveying over the years. This map here pretty much shows what we're planning, including some stuff that we've done already. Let's see if I have an arrow. Yep. So this year we did first stage of the survey expansion, we expanded the survey into parts of Area 2A and 4A, which we hadn't previously surveyed. We'll be talking about that a little bit as part of this talk, but particularly down in Northern California, redo of the Salish Sea expansion, and some important gaps in Area 4A, particularly, that's the trick, particularly out here in the west in deeper waters and some gaps along the edge and Unimac Pass. For next year, we're proposing to do redo the calibration we did in 2006 between our own setline survey and the NIMS Troll survey on the Eastern Bering Sea. And that part of the survey is represented by that sparser grid of paired stations that you see up in the Bering Sea. That way we have a somewhat different design because it's such a large area and the distribution is much sparser than it is elsewhere. And that's our proposal for next year. Now, otherwise, there's a lot of gaps in there that we're considering to fill in. This is a quick summary. We're proposing to do this expansion over a 6-year period. Year 1 was 2014. We're expanding the survey to deep and shallow waters, which are not currently part of the setline survey depth range. We'll talk more about it in a minute. And also, perhaps more importantly, in many areas, into unsurveyed gaps in our current survey depth range. Our aim is to reduce bias in the current indices of abundance, like the weight per unit effort index that you're familiar with, and in the apportionment process, because we use those indices to help apportion biomass. And also, hopefully, improve the quality of the length and age data that we use in the assessment. It's possible that we're going to have different distributions of length and age in those areas that we're not currently surveying than in the areas we're surveying. This will come at a cost, these expansions. We project that for each year of the expansion, the cost increase will be 5 to 12% over what we're currently doing on the standard setline survey. But those costs will be partially offset by the sales of fish that we catch in those expanded areas. So a little more depth. The rationale for the expansion, the survey has some substantial gaps in coverage. It's an excellent survey in general. It covers from Area 2A up to the Bering Sea. Very few, if any, surveys have this breadth and consistency of coverage that our survey has, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. There's some room for improvement. So we have no stations currently in deep or shallow waters, no standard stations in deep or shallow waters. And by deep or shallow, well, what I mean is that our current setline survey standard 10 nautical mile grid, the stations are set between 20 and 275 fathoms. And we've gone back over some commercial data, and we found that there are commercial catches, at least in some areas, in deep waters, particularly in Area 4, and in many areas in shallow waters. And these are not covered by the so that tells us there are halibut in those waters, and we're not currently surveying those halibut. We also have large gaps within this current depth range, and there may be historical reasons for these gaps existing. But we found that we were able to, at least in the regions we've done so far, we can quite successfully fill these gaps with stations. And we also have had no coverage in the Eastern Bering Sea since 2006. So that's going on. Next year, it'll be 9 years since we've done that survey, and things change, as you know, in the distribution of halibut and in the indices. And so we're concerned that the one-off calibration, that data, as time moves on, becomes less relevant to what's going on now. And there's a pressing need to update our information on that. So there's a potential with these gaps, unsurveyed areas, and some of them quite large, as I mentioned. There's a potential for some bias in our indices and in the apportionment process. Maybe the indices are too high or too low in some areas relative to others. Maybe we're not tracking the trend as well as we should be. So the average weight per unit effort currently in unsurveyed regions is assumed to be the same as in the regions we survey. We take the weight per unit effort in both the assessment and the apportionment process. We take the weight per unit effort that we get from the 20 to 275 grid, and we apply it across the board from 0 to 400 fathoms, even though we don't have stations in those areas, and apply it to areas where we have gaps as well. But we've done a number of expansions in the past, and they've shown that we do have biases. When we do the expansion, it makes a change to our understanding of the stock and its spatial distribution, and it improves our indices. And we found biases in these indices from 4 to 23% per reg area due to incomplete survey coverage in the past. And those are biases that we've since removed, but we've got, we may expect similar kind of issues with the areas that we're not currently surveying. And there's possibly potential for some of these biases to combine over a coastwide level in ways that may not be clear. So, and also we hope to improve, as I mentioned, the length and age data using the assessment. The data we get now come from, although a very large proportion of the habitat, it still might not be fully representative of the population of halibut. If the characteristics of halibut, their say their average size or average age, or the distribution of those differ between the areas that we survey and those that we don't. So currently we're using 5 methods for estimation for these indices of abundance. And in order of the quality of estimates, our confidence in these estimates, they are as follows. So method 1, we have our direct estimates from the IPHC setline surveys, and that's our best data. We're going in directly in summertime and surveying these habitats. The survey is designed in a way that it's representative of all the habitat in the area for which we have coverage, and we get very good data from that. We also have 1 or more setline surveys which are calibrated to more frequent surveys using other methods. And in particular, we've had the Eastern Bering Sea survey, which we surveyed once, calibrated to a very long time series from 1982 onwards for the NIMS trawl survey. So we have a time series for that area, but it's only been calibrated to our survey once. And we also have several surveys where we've gone in and done some kind of filling in the gaps or some kind of coverage, maybe in 1 or more years, but we don't do it consistently from year to year. And then we need to come up with a ratio from the years which we've done the survey to estimate what we would get in the unsurveyed areas in the years when we're not doing those surveys. So examples include the Sailor Sea in Area 2A, where we first surveyed it in 2011, and then we used that ratio between the full survey from 2011 and the more limited survey stations from that year to estimate what that contribution from the Sailor Sea would be in other years. There are also areas where we have no direct sampling at all. Well, there's one particular area where we have no direct sampling at all. And our estimates are calibrated to other surveys based on relationships with other surveys or one-off surveys from other sources. And that area, which I'll talk a little bit about, is the Northern Bering Sea. We've never had a survey way up in the north beyond the range of our Eastern Bering Sea survey. But NIMS has been there once in 2010. There's also a Northern Sound survey, triannual trawl survey. And we make use of those data in conjunction with our own data to try and come up with an estimate for that. And then there's estimates, then there's areas where we just have nothing. We've had no data. And those include the deep waters, the shallow waters, and those large gaps in the surveys in our current depth range. And we're just assuming, we're basically extrapolating the data from our current survey, as I mentioned, into those areas. So each method makes stronger assumptions than the preceding method, and we'd rather have more areas move up to the ones with the smaller numbers than we currently have. And that's the goal of this expansion and some of the other work I'll be talking about. So here's where the areas fall among the methods. The top part of the table shows what we've done prior to 2014. There's been some improvement this year. So currently areas 2A to 4CD in the 20 to 275 depth range, aside from gaps, fall under method 1, the Eastern Bering Sea Flats method 2, 2A Puget Sound, Sailor Sea, Northern California north of 40 degrees, method 3, Northern Bering Sea, method 4, and then basically the gaps, deep, shallow, and the other gaps are in method 5. So this year we moved part of Northern California from 39 to 40. We moved from method 5 to method 3. We also moved the deep waters in area 2A and area 4A and shallow waters too from method 5 to method 3. After 2019, when the whole thing's done, we hope to have nothing in method 5. We would have had at least one direct estimate from everywhere, except for the Northern Bering Sea, and we'll talk a bit more about that. And then other areas, so those would move from method 5 to method 3, and in method 2, again, we'd have the recalibration of the Bering Sea. So we're hoping to move things up the chart and make improvements in each area. So the proposed plan as it currently stands, is from 2014 to 2019. 2014, we ticked that box. We did a full expansion in Area 2A down to 39 degrees north. And in Area 4A, I'll talk a little bit about those expansions. Next year, we have the crucial 4CD Eastern Bering Sea Flats recalibration, followed by a 4CD Edge expansion proposed for 2016, where we have some sizable gaps in the current range and also no stations in the very northern part of the edge. 4B has some of the most substantial gaps in coverage, both within the 20 to 275 range, and it also has the largest amount of deep water, proportion of deep water of any area. And so this would be a substantial expansion in Area 4B. In fact, it's the only area, I think, which would have more expansion stations than we currently have stations at present. Down the list, 2B, 2C, we have some big gaps and some decent gaps in 2B in shallow waters, in particular around Dogfish Bank and the Strait of Georgia. We have no stations. 2C has actually pretty excellent coverage, and there wouldn't be much expansion there. And 3A and 3B, some gaps there too. So we prioritize these based on their likely contribution to our indices. The 4CD Eastern Bering Sea Flats is likely to have it could have a considerable influence on our understanding of the stock in that area and the indices going forward in particular. And also coastwide stock assessments and their feasibility, vessel availability, for example, helped us determine whether that we are doing 2A and 4A this year. I'll quickly go through the proposed expansion effort that we're proposing to make. Just scan to the very last column as a summary. The deep stations, the new deep stations would be 119 stations out of a total of 701 additional expansion stations. Shallow would be 74 stations. The vast majority of stations would be in that 20 to 275 range, which is our current survey depth range, filling in gaps that we are not currently surveying. And the standard grid, by contrast, has 1,261 stations that we fish every year. So we've already done 2A and 4A, and some substantial expansions there. Eastern Bering Sea, we currently have no stations as part of our standard grid. There'll be 82 stations, 41 pairs proposed for next year. The Edge and Islands, additional stations, 82 stations. In fact, that would be greater than the number of stations we have now. 4B is the greatest amount of deep water, 51 stations, and compared to 104 stations that we've got now and 49 stations in the standard grid. That's another big expansion. And fewer number of stations for the other areas. So we've looked at the costs in some detail, but as a summary, we expect that the vessel cost will be 5 to 12% higher each year, depending on the area we're going to. Some areas will be more expensive than others, either because it's just more expensive to survey out there or because we're planning to do more stations. But the cost will be partially covered by the revenue from additional fish sales. And so areas where densities are likely to be lower, for example, the deep waters in the Gulf of Alaska, the Eastern Bering Sea, northern 4D edge, the Strait of Georgia, we might anticipate lower densities than we're getting in our current survey. They'll be offset by filling in gaps in high-density areas like the 220 to 275 gaps in 2C, 3A, and 3B. And most of the expansions that I've already pointed out will be in those depth ranges. The depth ranges where we get, in most areas, quite decent catches that we're able to sell to offset the costs. The Northern Bering Sea, this is the only area in the current range of halibut that we don't have proposal for an expansion. It's an area that we're still discussing internally, and we're interested in we're interested in suggestions for how we can help maybe move this forward. The weight per unit effort, it is an area of low density. Currently, we estimate weight per unit effort in that area from the range of data, mix of data that we're importing from the Northern Sound Survey, the NIMS 2010 full survey, and connecting that with other surveys. We estimate that weight per unit effort to be about 5 pounds per skate, which is the lowest of anywhere that we're surveying. That's about half that of the southern Eastern Bering Sea region, which is why and it's about 1/3, that area is about 1/3 of the size of that Eastern Bering Sea region, which is why we've emphasized doing that southern region rather than this northern region. we get much more bang for our buck in terms of improving our information in that proposal. And we also have some possibly unique challenges in that large area. That it's likely that far north the distribution of halibut is quite patchy. There may be localized areas of quite high density. If we were to continue our sparser grid north, we might have a high chance of missing some of those patches. And there's also a very high proportion of shallow habitat around North and Sound around the coast compared to other areas that we don't currently survey using our long-line gear for logistical reasons. So there's some unique challenges there. It's not off our radar. It's something we'd like to continue investigating and see how that might fit in the broader proposals for expanding the survey. Okay, so we've talked about the proposed expansions, and so I'm going to look a little bit about what we did this year, and this will give you a sense of what kind of information we're getting for the money we're spending, and it is useful information. Okay, I'll walk you through this. This is a map of 032 weight per unit effort by station. Each point represents a satellite survey station in 2014 in Reg Area 4A. The red circles represent stations that we have been occupying since the survey has been implemented. Those are our standard grid that we do every year. The blue stations were the blue stations and the green stations, or the black as it appears there, are the stations that were new in 2014. Those are the expansion stations. The blue are in the standard 20 to 275 depth range, and the green are the deep stations. The X's are stations in which we caught nothing, and otherwise the size of the circle is proportional to the weight per unit effort that we got this year. So a couple of things really stand out to me. One is that we had very, very good coverage in the past in areas with quite low density. So the southern part, southeastern part of the island chain there, you see lots of dots, small dots and X's. Quite low density there, but we had basically no need to expand into that area. We had very good coverage there already. We had, by contrast, we had poor coverage in some areas with high density. Out on the western part of Area 4A, we didn't have, we basically had just 1 or 2 stations out there. And the new stations in both deep and standard depths produced some of the highest densities in this reg area in 2014. You see the blue circles and the dark green circles out far west. We also had a substantial gap on the edge where we were surveying down to 75 fathoms instead of 20 fathoms, which is our standard for most reg areas. The 75 fathoms was consistent with the rest of the Bering Sea edge, but it wasn't consistent with what we were doing elsewhere in Area 4A. So there was some inconsistency in the way we were combining the data there. And we got some pretty decent catches up there too. Overall, so what we do with these data is we come up with a calibration coefficient. If we're not going to continue doing these stations in years to come, we need to estimate what their contribution would have been had we surveyed them based on this year's survey, and also what their contribution was in the past. And it turns out this calibration coefficient this year for 032 weight per unit effort is 1.118. What that means is that the station, if you combine the data from all the stations and get the weight per unit effort from those and divide by the weight per unit effort from the standard survey stations that we've done in the past, the full survey gives a weight per unit effort that's 11.8% higher. So what that means is we likely had a negative bias in the past in Area 4A. We were underestimating weight per unit effort and likely underestimating its share of the overall coastwide stock. So that's a significant improvement in our understanding of the distribution of stock in Area 4A that we've gained from this survey and expansion. It's also worth pointing out that it didn't all just come from the deep and shallow. Most of this came from the standard survey stations, which there were more of than the deep and shallow stations. And the new 20 to 275 stations actually had 32% higher weight per unit effort than the existing stations. Area 2A was the other area we expanded into in 2014. The red again represents the stations we had occupied historically, at least in recent years. The blue are the expansion areas, and those are on the left side, left panel, we have the Salish Sea, Puget Sound region. We got some decent catches up there this year, and also on the right-hand side, Northern California, which is much sparser. In fact, we got no fish in the brand new area between 39 and 40 degrees north. So some changes from the last time we did this. The Salish Seaway pioneer effort was up 62% from 2011. So there's some temporal variability in there in that survey. It's a relatively small part of the overall number of stations, but we got a different understanding this year than we did in 2011. Other stations we occupied in 2013 in Northern California, so just the standard depth range from 40 to 42, we had a 29% decrease in Northern California from 2013. So overall, we've improved the quality of our information in this area as well, and now for the first time we have almost practically complete coverage for Area 2A in one single year. Area 2A provides an example where we do still have perhaps some missing information, and that's south of 39. The data from this year's survey seems to indicate that densities would be likely very low south of there, but nevertheless, we'd like to have some information on that, and it may be hard to justify putting in a setline survey down there when densities are so low. But there is some auxiliary data that we might be able to use, and I'm going to move on to that part right now. So we're looking at complementary surveys. How can we use surveys from other agencies to fill in some of these gaps in the years in which we're not able to go and survey those? So there's a potential to calibrate data from those surveys to the setline surveys, and in the same way that we're doing that in the Eastern Bering Sea. We've only gone there once. We have a full-time series for the Eastern Bering Sea because NIMS Troll survey goes there every year. So the idea here is to move some of the methods that we've currently or in the future will have as method, some of the areas that we currently or in the future have as under method 3, move them up into method 2. So we don't just have a one-off calibration ratio that we're applying historically, and in the future we can actually create a time varying series for those pieces that we're not able to survey every year. So in 2014, we started that process by using data from the NIMS Sablefish Longline Survey to index halibut in deep waters in areas 2A, 2C, 3A, 3B, and area 4D edge. This is a fairly extensive survey that has stations that span our standard depth range cutting across into deep waters. And they have reasonably good coverage in those areas that I've just listed, 2C, 3A, 3B, and area 4D. So we're able to come up with a deep water index based on the ratios of catches in the deeper waters to the standard depth ranges, and that we're able to apply for those areas. Turns out that in almost all of those areas except area 4D, they catch very few halibut in deep waters. So the deep water indices are close to 0. And because the deep water habitat is not a high proportion of the habitat in those areas, it doesn't make much of a difference to the indices in those areas. There's a bit of a difference with area 4D edge, but in recent years that was a pretty low density too. The area 2C, we don't have a corresponding survey for area 2B. There is some kind of deep survey there, but it's much more limited in range. And so we're using this year we're using the 2C deep index that we created from the Sablefish survey for area 2B, and we think that's reasonable. There's relatively little deep habitat in area 2B too. We got no fish in area 2A this year in deep water, and the 2C index is close to 0, so it's most likely that the 2B index would be similar. There is some sablefish survey coverage in area 4A, but the survey coverage isn't really adequate for our needs. We don't have a lot of coverage in that area where we got most of our deep water stations, catching our deep water stations. There's only one station in that vicinity. The coverage on the edge doesn't really match where we put our stations at all, where we found the most deep water habitat is, and the data that we get from the sablefish survey don't really line up with what we got this year in 2014 in our own survey. So we're not using that sablefish data to create a time series for 4A. In area 2A, likewise, we're still looking at the survey, the other surveys for doing that, and we're just using the survey from this year to have a deep water index for that. Area 4B, there's only sablefish survey coverage in the far east of Area 4B, and so it really doesn't represent most of Area 4B. Area 4B is, from the data we have from commercial catches, maybe more like Area 4A in that it may have higher densities of deep water. And so we're continuing to apply the 20 to 275 fathom weight per unit effort to all depths in Area 4B this year. It really emphasizes the importance of doing that survey that we're proposing in 4B for a couple of years from now, a satellite survey expansion. So finally, is a summary of some of the complementary surveys we've been looking at to figure out whether we can make use of these data or not. We're all, the ones with the red bar are the ones that have the greatest potential for use to complement the data we're using. We're already using the Bering Sea Bottom Trawl Survey. It's an annual survey. It covers depths that we don't generally cover. And we're also looking at the Area 2A Bottom Trawl Survey. We've got some data that we haven't had a chance to look at yet. It covers deep waters. It also covers Northern California, deeper than 30 fathoms, and goes, I think, south of our current survey. So we're not currently using that. The sablefish survey we're using for the first time this year. We also have other various NIMS bottom trawl surveys. They're not as, they may have some use, but they're either not conducted every year or the coverage is more limited than the ones I've just listed. Area 2B bottom trawl surveys, partial annual coverage, Bering Sea slope survey, generally done biannually. Northern Sound, it's supposed to say Northern Sound Trawl Survey, not North Sound Trawl Survey. We do use this. It's triennial. It only covers a part of Northern Sound, but we still make use of that data. And various other more limited surveys. Okay. So that's hopefully gives you a taste of what we're hoping to do in the next few years. There's quite a lot of work involved. Yeah, so next year we're looking forward to doing that Eastern Bering Sea calibration. That's a very important piece of the puzzle. So turn it over to questions.
All right, thanks very much, Ray. To see if any commissioners have any questions. Don?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we go back to slide 1, please?
I was about to do that. The map?
There you go. That's the one. So I want to context mostly around the Bering Sea. Bering Sea comes up regularly in our deliberations and at the council, and it has a closed area right in the middle of it, which in reality is only closed to halibut fishermen, and that area is extensively used by trawlers and longliners and crab pot fishermen and just about every other user group. I wonder on the Bering Sea Flats survey, the proposed survey, you have 82 stations. Could you characterize that survey for me in what you is that just one area, one boat? Be able to do that survey? I'm trying to get a, because that is a huge area. I'm trying to get a context of what it's going to actually take to do the calibration survey, and then I'll have a follow-up question after that.
In 2006, we divided that region into 3 survey regions, and I think it was 3 different vessels fished those regions, so we had to use 3 regions to manage that. So three, is this working? We had 3 regions. The 82 stations were divided into 3 regions. We had 3 different vessels that were surveying those regions in 2006. So it's possible that it's likely, I imagine, that we'd have to manage it the same way in 2015.
So, if I may, so going back to the 2006 survey, I think at that time you had 111 stations and not 82. Some of those stations were absorbed in the 4D Edge expansion. Is that correct? So I'm assuming because of depth. So we'll probably need 2 boats to do that, and it's considered, I guess in 2006 we did the survey. In 2011, the survey went out to bid, or I'm assuming it went out to bid, but it wasn't successful at the survey being done. A couple questions come to mind is that if that happened again, if there was a recurring where no one bid on these surveys, does this calibration survey go to the bottom of the priority list? Does it maintain its position as the priority list? And then say you need 2 boats, but you have 1 boat that bids, so maybe you can only do 1 of the 3 regions. Is that a way to move forward? 2006 is quite a ways away. I'm just trying to get a characterization of this calibration survey. I think it's very important, and I'm glad it's at the top of the priority list for this coming year. I wanted something to move forward successfully that's useful. I'm just trying to characterize what's going to be needed, and if we can't get everything we want, is there a fallback plan? And then what are the long-term consequences if again we weren't able to move forward? Thank you.
That's a good question. My preference would be first, it should maintain its place at the top of the list of priorities. If we can't do it in 2015 for whatever reason, I think 2016 should be the next year, and another survey, and we'd see what we could do in 2015 instead. Before I forget, I'll go back to another point. The 111 stations done in 2006 included stations around the islands, St. Matthew and the Pribilofs. Those are the stations that we've continued doing since then, and so that's why it's only 82 this year. As far as dividing it up into 3 regions in separate years, I would prefer not to do that. We are calibrating it with the troll survey, and then that would involve 3 different calibrations in different years, and things would get kind of messy. You would have potentially the distribution would be shifting around from year to year, and I think it would be hard to tease out what was going on if you didn't have it all done in 1 year. So we haven't discussed a backup plan if we only get a bid for 1 region, but I would try to do whatever we could to ensure it was all done in 1 year. If that's in 1 or 2 years from now, then so be it, but I would rather do that than have it broken up into pieces and have inconsistent information.
Any other comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Just to amplify a little bit on Ray's comment, when we look at the Eastern Bering Sea survey, we see some pretty substantial shifts in distribution among years in the trawl survey, and that's the kind of thing that would be vulnerable to not doing all those at the same time.
Dave, you had a question?
Ray, you have demonstrated pretty convincingly in 4A and 2A some of the differentials that the survey expansion has brought to light. It seems to provide a rationale for continuing with the survey expansion, but we're running up against a cost issue, and so my question is, can you see a way and provide us with alternatives with the rest of the survey that we've been doing for many years to reduce the costs there and still provide information to the stock assessment people of a sufficient quality to allow them to generate good numbers there? Did that make any sense? Should I try?
No, it made sense. You're looking at, we've had suggestions in the past for having a less dense grid in some areas. We've had suggestions for doing parts in 1 year and parts in another year. Every time you do something like that, you make a compromise at some level, and the costs may not fall out the way you expect them to do. For example, were we to do a thinner grid, say every second station or 3 out of 4 stations or something, if you do every second station, that doesn't halve your costs because you still have the running time cost that continues and is larger between stations. And so it's not clear to me how costs are going to change. That would require some kind of analysis with information that I don't store in my head. So the other part is you start doing things from a piece 1 year, a piece another year. You increase your variability in your indices, and that becomes particularly concerning in areas like 2A or the western areas where we have relatively patchy distributions, less precise information, and it's going to add more volatility to your apportionment as well as your indices. Maybe not on a coastwide level because you're still aggregating a lot of information, even on a thinner grid or a grid that's done partially each year. But when we're using this information for apportionment, some of these areas, it's quite important that we maintain the kind of effort that we're doing now. So there may be some room for and also, when you start to thin some of them, thinning some of the stations or reducing your density, you're not just discarding stations that catch no halibut, you're discarding stations or reducing the number of stations that actually catch halibut and offset the costs in other areas. So if we were to thin the grid in area 3A, well, the money we're getting from 3A would that would possibly reduce our the money that we're generating in 3A that's offsetting area 2A in western areas, for example. I don't have my finger on the pulse of these costs, but those are the kind of considerations you need to take into account. So there may be some possibility of doing that kind of thing, but it's not guaranteed you're going to make the savings you think you're going to make, and I think we need a more in-depth analysis to try to understand that. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
Bob, you had a question.
Yes, Ray, in 2011, when you didn't get the bids, harvest
level? It was 2008.
Okay, 2008. Our harvest levels were probably 50% higher. It was lush fishing time, and things are not quite the same. So I'm going to hope that there'd be more demand for some activity. So just for the general public's information, I'm going to assume these would be like a June, July, August survey. And what's the time frame of one leg of these surveys anticipated to be?
I'm going to pass you over to my colleague, Claude. Claude, the survey manager.
So yeah, the surveys happen in June, July, and August. They typically start up the last week of May, and they can drag into the first week of September. But essentially, it's the summer months when we have the best window of weather opportunity to be out there. The vessels bid on doing an area takes them roughly 3 weeks of work to complete for each region, and that includes the 3 regions that we have currently laid out on the 2006 model in the Eastern Bering Sea. All the things that Ray's mentioned are certainly factors there, and yes, while there's lower quotas, it's one of those challenges as an agency to go out and say, hey, we're lowering your quotas, but hey, we've got a deal for you. We've got this extra survey work. So we do that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but there's also the reality of what we've seen over recent years as to who's coming to the table to bid on the work. So we did rebid the work in 2008, and we did not get sufficient bids to cover the areas. In 2014, our most recent summer here, with the expansion in Area 4, we effectively had we effectively doubled our survey regions in that area, and it was a challenge to parse it out to make it workable for boats. So typically a vessel is allowed to complete up to 3 charter regions per summer without overtasking them or the staff that are out there. This year we had to modify that to enable boats to complete it. So we could give them, for instance, 3.5 to 4 areas of work. And that still gives us enough wiggle room if a vessel has a breakdown that we can slide that extra work to an available boat. Even with that, we had one eligible new vessel come to the table and show interest to the work. It's certainly a type of work that can extend a vessel's season to give their crew and skipper more work. It can extend and spread out their insurance costs and costs like that. And I think the vessels that have come to the table certainly see the benefits to that, and I think there's benefits to be gained by other vessels in that same situation. But the reality is as well that this is a survey that's based on conventional gear type. Fish is stuck gear in a fixed way, and there's less and less vessels interested or capable of doing that sort of work that are coming to the table. A lot of the vessels that are in that gear sector either switch to another fishery as they finish their quota, or right now there's a lot of competition with salmon packing. And so a lot of these vessels, they can run less crew, get paid more money to just go pack salmon or sit around waiting to pack salmon. So we have those sorts of competitions to our project.
Thank you.
Ted?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In a simplistic way of looking at the question for me is, anything below or anything at a 25 per pound skate and a 0 per pound skate is suspect to me, and the reason why I go back there year to year. It seems to me that the assumption that that is going to be the same thing on the second year is pretty logical. So, having said that, it would seem that why wouldn't you revisit these sites every second year and transfer those costs into something that has more value? You can't get any lower than 0. Anything above that is on the second year is going to be pretty recognizable.
Did you want to comment, Marie? Maybe, well, you think about whether you want to or not. I had a question, or maybe it's actually for clarification. So the way I understand this, at present, out of the 1,267 annual sites that are done, you're proposing another 701 sites, and those are not to be done annually, but would be done over this sequence of years to improve the calibration of the areas that are, I'll use the word marginal, but maybe that's not quite the best adjective, and to better calibrate. And you're also looking at using other surveys to help calibrate so to reduce costs. Do I have that right?
Yes.
So the other part I was wondering then is, if we just do this once, what are your views on doing this into the future? Is it just a one-time shot to calibrate, or is we looking at doing this over some, I don't know, period, every 5 years, every 10 years, 20? And I do notice, I think it was in your report that it said, Area 2A, given the very low abundance, well, no fish in part of the area, that survey lost $23,000. So I think it was 2A. So, I mean, it's along the lines of Ted's point is, okay, we've seen some cost, and so are we really getting the benefit that we need? Do we need to do this work?
Right. So the first point about do we revisit these surveys once we've done the expansion? Well, it depends on the information we get from these. Something like Area 4A, where we found very high catches in the western area, decent catches in other parts where we didn't have information previously, and the densities are quite high. I think there would be some desire in the future to go revisit that, to see if there's some, if that's something that is true consistently. In the same way that we want to revisit the calibration in 2006 in the Eastern Bering Sea. As time goes on, the information you've got becomes less relevant to the present. The distribution changes, the size of age changes, so many things change that affect the indices and information you're getting. So in Area 2A, well, another clue is to whether we would have interest in going back would be some of these complementary surveys. They would give us perhaps a sense of distributional shifts. And so suddenly we saw fish showing up in the troll survey in off San Francisco, then we want to perhaps consider doing a setline survey down there. So there's information that would feed into that. So I wouldn't call this the end of the line. We wouldn't want to say 2019, that's it, we're done. We're never going to revisit any of these things again. But it may not be that we have to do this in such a blanket, coherent manner over a 6-year period. There are some areas that we would discover should be priorities for revisiting, in the same way that Eastern Bering Sea is a priority now. In other areas, because their overall contribution to the coastwide stock is low, or it just seems an area that's very consistent, to be less need to revisit those. So.
Thanks very much, Ray. Jim.
Yes, thank you. So I'm back on the 4 CDE thing again, I guess, and I must confess that it's not very satisfying to hear you say that if we don't get enough bids, we aren't going to do it, and we'll do it another year. You know, it's been 9 years, it'll be 10 years. There's no reason to be. Maybe Bob's right, and less opportunity for the boats will be looking for work. And as Claude said, there will probably be boats that used to fish in the Bering Sea that are looking for work. But I don't think that's acceptable to say we're just going to put it off. We have this picture of halibut now that the nation's seeing, or the halibut nation, which looks pretty good for everybody except 4 C, D, and E. And we can't even figure out how to get a survey there for sure. I think we have to get a survey there for sure. And if we can't do all of it next year, we got to figure out a way to do part of it. And if we can't use the data because it's snap gear, we got to figure out a way to use snap gear. We've got this single data point from 2006 that doesn't allow us to have an idea of precision or bias in it at all. So after 10 years, we might get another point. That's like another single point. It's not going to be 2 points anymore. It's like you said, it's irrelevant what happened back then. We've got to figure out a way to do this more than once every decade. That's the area now where we have problems. And I don't think we can say, we'll do it if we get a bid. So we've got to figure that out.
Thanks, Jim. Steve, Don.
Yeah, maybe for Claude, on the survey expansion in 4A, and then how much is that fish going into Dutch harbors? Any of it going into St. Paul? I'm just wondering where those survey fish were tending to go to market in 2014.
Okay, so the fish in 2014 predominantly went into Dutch Harbor. Some of it went into Sandpoint. Further to your question, though, in 2006 when we did the Eastern Bering Sea survey, because you're so far from market and there's so much running involved, we structured it so that there could be a certain portion of the survey that just simply would not retain fish until, say, the last 10 days, so that you were within steaming distance to bring that fish back to market, because otherwise you'd be out so long you'd be bringing in product that nobody wanted. So we can get creative in that angle of things. And just one other part that I didn't mention earlier, we did put up for bid in 2014 a request for supplemental bids or interest for people to come and approach us to discuss extra surveys in the Eastern Bering Sea shelf. And we had some cursory discussions with people, but nobody came to the table with a formal offer of a vessel or anything that we could do anything with. So we certainly put the request out already in 2014 to go on a further expansion than simply the 4A area, which wasn't a small undertaking in itself, but we were certainly prepared and requesting that sort of approach, and it didn't go anywhere.
All right. Steve, are there any questions online?
Yes, we have 3 questions online. And I'll just report them in the order they came in. The first was from Chuck Ashcroft early on in Ray's presentation. What will the ongoing costs be of this expanded survey after the initial surveys? This cannot be a one-off survey, so ongoing costs can be expected. And what is this anticipated extra cost? And you may have already answered that in the discussion.
I think I've answered as much as I can. I can't talk about dollars, but
okay,
he's right. it may not be the end of it.
And then the second one is from Philip Lestenkoff, and it goes to what Claude was just mentioning. He says, we understand an EBS survey proposal was put out to bid in 2014 but had no takers. What was the reason for the failure of the bid process, and how can it be remedied to ensure that the survey is guaranteed to be completed in 2015?
Yeah, it's a good question. We discussed these challenges to recruiting new vessels to the work. We discussed them at the office a fair bit. We try to get information out to the various industry groups through a variety of means, everything from news releases to discussions at meetings like these, through various media outlets, that sort of thing. How do we get people to, so to speak, put their money where their mouth is? I'm not sure the correct answer to that. Certainly to what Commissioner Balsker commented on, at some point we need to look at other options, whether that be a different type of gear, and again, we'd have to do calibration work with that to understand how it compares to the current set line methodology, and it would probably have to be done realistically over time and in different halibut densities to truly understand that relationship. You can't do it, as we've already discussed, with a single data point. How to get the money to do it is the other challenge. These areas are more remote than the central areas. There's not a quick market. The fish are held on the vessels longer to make it efficient to continue doing the work and reduce the running costs. But the reality is the charter regions in this area are 50% to 75% more costly than the same charter region in the Central Gulf. And that's just on the raw cost side. That's not even on the recovered revenue side from selling product from the survey. So other solutions would have to be looked at there, or monies would have to be freed up somehow to look at that. And you know, how that plays into regular ongoing coverage in other areas with respect to apportionment, it creates its own other issues. I know, you know, pre-1998 we would sometimes do certain areas one year and then do them every other year, for instance. But there are other challenges within that. Some probably can be dealt with mathematically, and some I don't know that they can without new money coming forward. Bruce may be able to speak to that better than I.
I think Jim raised a really fundamental question that we have struggled with for quite a while. Two of them actually. One is how do we get vessels into areas where we don't get anybody bidding for them? If we go back to the vessels that bid for other areas and say we're going to redirect you into the Bering Sea, they may not do it because they're saying, you know, that's the reason I didn't bid on it, because we didn't, you know, it's not an economic prospect for us to do that. The second part of it, I think, is a very real question that we've struggled with quite a bit. Is as Claude mentioned, there's a lower number of vessels now using stuck gear, although still probably on the order of over half the catch is coming from stuck gear at you know, better than 12-foot spacing. But there is decreasing expertise with that gear, and there is an increasing number of snap gear vessels around there. I think it is something that we need to do in the longer term, is to build the calibration between survey using snap gear and survey using fixed gear. I think that's something that we've recognized for a number of years as something that's a serious constraint on the vessels that we're able to access for doing some of this work. Whether that will solve the problem, I don't know, but I think just given the trend in the industry, it's probably something that should be done.
Yeah, the third question, Steve.
Yes, the last question, Melanie Parker writes that Deb Wilson-Vandenberg of CDFW's understanding of the southward expansion in 2A, Northern California, to Point Arena was exploratory. Given the lack of fish in the survey, how far south did the assessment cover? So it's actually an assessment question.
I can still take that. I mean, I think we're only using data from 39 degrees north, but I think as far as the assessment goes, it's just built into the selectivity and so on, that if there are fish down there, they're not. Yeah, Ian can elaborate, but I think it's essentially anything we're not surveying is still built into the stock that's being assessed. we just don't have direct data that feeds into the lengths and ages and indices.
That's it, Steve. Any questions from the here? Yep. Come up to the microphone, please.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Kaufman. I'm from St. Paul Island, and I work with Central Bering Sea Fishermen's Association, which is the community development group for St. Paul. And obviously, our community is heavily dependent on the halibut resource. I think last summer we had 16 boats and upwards of 80 to 100 people working in the industry. And much like St. Paul, I think there's small vessels all up and down the coast, the western coast of western Alaska. I think there were 228 small boats that made CDQ deliveries in 2012. So obviously this is a very, very important resource to us. And we would really encourage and like to see this this recalibration survey as well as the 4D Edge expanded survey take place in 2015 and 16. So CBSFA made a presentation, I think, to the commissioners last year and offered up maybe some money or some help to ensure that this survey gets done. And it appears to me that there's two obstacles. One of them is the vessel availability, and then the second is the fact that it's so cost prohibitive. So our group, and I can't speak for the other groups, but I would assume that they would also contribute money if that is an obstacle and something that needs to be done. So we would like to offer help from Central Bering Sea Fishermen's Association to help fund the survey. We're not asking for any input into the survey or anything else. We just, whatever you're doing, if it needs additional funds and if we can help out, it's something I think that our board of directors would entertain. And I think other CDQ groups are probably in the same boat. So we'd just like to offer that up. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yep, done.
Jeff? Yeah, thank you for that, Jeff. I'm just wondering, could you characterize for me the 280 boats that you just referred to? Am I on? 228. Yeah. I'm wondering, are those two-man boats, three-man boats? How many people do you think are involved in those boats that are on the boats?
That's a great question. In St. Paul, there's 100 people directly involved in halibut fishery, whether they're baiting hooks or working on the deck or running boats. That number, 228 boats that made CDQ landings in 2012, came from a report of the fleet, I think it was called. That's where I pulled that information from. But these boats vary a little bit. I think the largest boat in the CDQ fleet is 46 feet, and you'll see lots of 32-footers and even skiffs throughout the coastal villages region and up through Nortonstown and onto Sibunga. So I'm assuming a lot of these boats probably run a 2- to 4-man crew.
All right, thanks very much, Jeff. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, Peggy.
Good morning. I'm Peggy Parker, the Executive Director of the Halibut Association of North America. I just have a couple of quick questions. I'm a little confused, mainly because I'm probably sitting too far away to actually hear everything. Otherwise, it was a great report. But is the closed area surveyed?
Yes. And you can see on the map here, there's the closed area right there. And there are stations, pairs of stations. Now, if you mean is it surveyed every year, no. It's part of the Eastern Bering Sea calibration that was done once in 2006. And then we use NIMS troll survey data from that area. Okay. So we do have data from that area every year via the troll survey, but it is part of the region we survey.
And it's the recalibration survey, not a direct survey from us?
It will be the recalibration will be a direct survey from us. It allows us to get some direct observations from using our own survey gear that we can line up with the NIMS troll survey data.
Great, thank you. Second of 3 questions is the survey, the question about what Ted brought up, whether we're going to go forward or not if we get 0, is that a part of a policy that the staff has, or is it a decision made on a year-by-year basis?
Make sure I understand the question. You're saying if we don't get any bids for the survey?
If we don't get any results.
We don't get any fish like in
results
Northern California.
the use of the data in the assessment just simply reflects what we catch on the survey. The idea of whether we would continue to go back to expand an area, the survey into an area where we don't have any information gets into Ray's hierarchy of how we try to fill in gaps on information. So on something like that, we probably would, as he mentioned, probably go first to, are there any other complementary surveys in that area that would give us some indication that something has changed in this area, rather than going back to that area in an expanded sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I was just curious whether there was a commission-wide policy on that. Third question, quickly, the increase in the weight per unit effort in the Salish Sea, do you have any reason why that was so high?
I don't have any biological reasons. I don't know if anyone else has any insight. It is a relatively small area, possibly just a dozen stations, if I remember rightly, something like a dozen stations in the Salish Sea. So you would expect quite a high degree of variability just by chance. You go in one day, you might get a different catch than you would come the next day, with quite a patchy distribution. So we can't definitively say that there's some underlying biological reason, or it's just a statistical variability underlying it with an area that small.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. We have 4 other items remaining. I'm going to suggest that we press on through and close and carry on without a break. And I think a number of them are fairly short. So over to you, Bruce, for the next one around the annual research plans and 5-year.
Backwards here. Okay. Am I up? Okay. You hearing me? You hear me? Okay. 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 Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things we wanted to touch on here. One was progress on the 5-year research plan. As you recall from our last annual meeting, we had presented a 5-year research plan, actually several versions of the 5-year research plan, and we then had discussions this year with had discussions this year with our scientific review board, and we've modified somewhat our approach to how we think we should be approaching the 5-year research plan. So what we've sat down to do is talk about where do we find significant uncertainties and understanding in managing halibut. So why is this not working? Okay. Here we are. So we sat down and talked about, and this is, again, a work in progress, but we sat down and talked about where we have significant uncertainties for halibut. And chief among these is migration rates and timing by length, age, sex, density, and year. Migration is likely to be volatile to all of those features. When we look at how to do an assessment of the halibut stock, we're currently using a coast-wide model because we know there's significant movement within the stock. In order for us to do something different, we need to have a clear understanding of what that migration rates among those areas might be. But even within the coast-wide stock, we need to have a better understanding of what migration is, particularly timing and the amount of movement by length, sex, and age. That represents a fairly significant uncertainty within our current understanding of managing halibut.
Another one that comes into this is bycatch amounts in non-target fisheries. Not only the bycatch amounts, but also the mortality rates that are applied to those mortalities. Changes in size and age over time, particularly in the Gulf of Alaska, which is where we've seen the major changes in size and age, is another thing that we're working on right now. That's actually through a large project we're dealing with National North Pacific Research Board funding. Part and parcel of trying to come up with spatially explicit models is also trying to understand the distribution of under 26-inch fish across the range of the stock in both time and space. What we're seeing, what we have seen historically is changes in its distribution over time, and this is one of the things not only with U26 fish but also the O26 fish. What's been that change over time, and where we had a significant retrospective problem in our halibut assessment was largely to do with the fact that we were using a fixed distribution of these fish, and that had changed over time. And the last thing that we have significant uncertainties about is looking at area-specific selectivities for catch, bycatch, and wastage. Where we have changes in size and age, this is going to change the selectivity as those fish are encountered by the gear. So all those things factor into us trying to understand what harvest policy should be and what the assessment should look like for this. So all of these things are significant uncertainties, and so what our approach to this has been, we've gone through a fairly significant change in how we're thinking about approaching this, and largely to do with our discussions with our scientific research board, is trying to set up longer-term plans to address these significant uncertainties rather than some of the ways that we may have done this in the past. So for example, and again, this is a work in progress, when we're looking at migration, we have several approaches to try and look at migration. We've been working with a company in eastern Canada, Low Tech Wireless, looking at geomagnetic tag development, and they've been promising us for the last several years that they're close. We almost have a geomagnetic tag ready to put out into the wild. But this is one of the things that we would be employing in trying to look at these migration rates, either looking at the geomagnetic tags or looking at a simpler archival tags, which has some accelerometers into it, but also does temperature, depth, and light. We're looking for a coastwide deployment of those tags beginning in 2016. We're also looking at trying to use these on a longer-term basis for 2017 and beyond, approximately 100 per year. These are relatively more expensive than standard tags, but less expensive than the larger pop-up satellite tags, which are about $4,000 a pop. But we're looking at trying to employ these over a longer time period to try to get a better handle on these migrations. The other part of this is trying to figure out the migration of juveniles, and that is probably the largest uncertainty we have, particularly out of Area 4. We did do some experiments in Area 3A in the 1980s, and we have some information from that, but in large measure we have very little information on the movement of juveniles out of the Bering Sea or even within the Bering Sea. So one of the approaches you can take for this is, okay, you have to have a very massive experiment, tagging probably hundreds of thousands of fish in a given year, or an alternative that we're considering is looking at a longer-term, smaller amount of tag releases on a regular basis from the Eastern Bering Sea and Gulf of Alaska trawl surveys conducted by NIMS. We currently have people aboard those vessels, and the intent here would be to using conventional wire tags to simply get those tags out into the wild so we could build on this on a longer time period. And this would not be a short-term process. This would be a fairly long-term process, but we'd at least be getting some tags out into there that we'd start to be able to recover in some of our other fisheries. It's important to recognize that what you're dealing with here are fish in the 15 to 50 centimeter range, and it's going to be a number of years before those fish are available to other forms of recapture. So that's just sort of ideas of where we're looking at trying to address one of the uncertainties. In terms of bycatch and discard mortality estimation, there's been recent developments in newer sorts of tags which are archival but also have accelerometers in them, so they record the movement of the fish. And this presents a really valuable opportunity for us to validate some of the estimates of our excellent condition fish that are released by either trawls or longline capture. Currently, all of our information on survival of fish is based on an understanding of the absolute survival of excellent quality fish. And that's based on some cage experiments that were done back in the 1970s. And we have some questions ourselves about how well that is estimated. So these tags present us with an opportunity to actually validate an absolute estimate for this. In conjunction with tagging and other conditions of release, by injury category or by condition factor as they're done on trawl fisheries. We also stand the way to validate the relative survival of the other categories of injured fish rather than just excellent. So we have excellent, poor, and dead. And we do actually get recoveries from fish that are classified as dead. But this represents an opportunity for us to actually validate those data. This can be a fairly significant issue because even a couple of % change in survival for large quantities of fish can result in some big numbers. So this is a fairly important thing. The second stage of this would be using a similar kind of technology, as I said, to look at the relative survival of other injury categories of fish. So this is the kind of approach we're taking in, Mr. Chairman. This is still a work in progress. And if you wish, I can show you the text we've got on sort of developing some of these programs. But this is the kind of approach we're developing on this, and we hope to have a more thorough discussion of this for our annual meeting. I think so. What I'd like to work to now, Mr. Chairman, if I may, unless there are questions on the, maybe I could stop here and answer questions in a long time.
Yeah, I think maybe just carry on, Bruce.
Okay. So the next thing is looking at the annual research plan that we developed for this year. Annually, we prepare a research plan where we have an internal research board that goes through a review process for proposals that we receive from the staff, as well as looking at proposals we receive from other agencies sometimes to do work on board our vessels. But primarily, this plan looks at the research proposed by staff. We discuss the priorities here and look at individual budgets, and what we put before you are the proposals that have come through our research board with our views on whether they should be funded or not. We also present to you the full package if there are ones where we have thought they shouldn't be funded, but you might wish to consider as well. So this is presented to you at this meeting. The final annual research plan is approved at the annual meeting for your adoption. So the 2015 annual research plan was developed within the framework of our 5-year research plan. In the 5-year research plan, there are four overarching objectives: stock identification, monitoring, assessment, harvest policy, biology, physiology, and migration, and then ecosystem interactions and environmental influences. Those are the 5 sort of overarching themes that we conduct research under. For the first one, stock identification, monitoring, and assessment, this focuses on the assessment and forecasting and incorporation of uncertainty in both data and processes into management advice. For 2015, this research includes our annual assessment, the fishery-dependent and independent monitoring, and also a genetic study to develop validation method for sex determination in conjunction with the pilot field marking of sex in the commercial fishery. And if you have questions on this, the investigators involved with this are present and they can talk about it. This is a fairly, as Ian showed you last year during our presentations of the assessment, the estimation of biomass is quite sensitive to the assumed sex ratio of the catch, and we don't know what the sex ratio of the catch is. We presently use a statistical method to get the sex at size and age within our survey and use that to estimate the sex within the size and age composition of the commercial landings. It's a statistical technique. It is not an absolute validation of it, so what we're looking for in this genetic technique is some way to actually validate what we do through other methods, and also to use this as a touchstone for what the sex composition is done with a proven method over time. For harvest policy and assessment, the 2015 research is focused primarily around the management strategy evaluation, although this morning's discussion may shift some of that. The harvest policy development is working on an understanding of current biology and stock objectives, and again, this is part of the MSE process, but as your direction to us this morning is, we may sort of move some of those elements up, but it is, again, part of the overall management strategy evaluation. In terms of biology, physiology, and migration, the projects before you in 2015 are continue the development of the archival tagging. The size at age studies, again, this is the NPRB project I referred to, where we're working with National Marine Fisheries Service, University of Alaska, University of Washington, and ourselves, looking at a fairly extensive look at the size at age issue, and we're seeking to understand it from the perspective of fishery effects, ecosystem effects, bioenergetic effects, and the underlying growth of density of the halibut itself. Length-weight relationships in ports and at sea is a fairly important component of us actually estimating the removals from the stock. We're using length-weight relationships that were developed a number of years ago. They were actually re-examined by Bill Clark about a decade and a half ago, and it was found to stand up then, but we still are having issues where vessels are coming in with landings and getting up with, if they're using our length-weight relationships, either underhailing or overhailing at particular times. So we need to look at this and find out if there's been some long-term shifts in the length-weight relationship across areas and time. The last part of this is a gonad maturity assessment. When we talk about looking at the spawning biomass, that's dependent on our ability to understand maturity in this animal. And like most agencies, we do a lot of our maturity assessment in the middle of the summertime when we're doing our surveys. The difficulty there is that's probably the worst time you can try to estimate maturity in a fish, because you don't know for sure what is a spent fish and what necessarily represents a maturing fish. And that's actually one of the significant issues for us in halibut. So this is a project we've been at for a number of years now, trying to get a relationship between external and histological sexing of the animals, just so we can nail down what is the maturing and the resting fish. The last research theme is under ecosystem interactions. In 2015, we'll be looking at oceanographic monitoring through our profilers on our survey stations, assessment of mercury and contaminants in fish, and also continue to look at monitoring ichthyophonus effects in halibut, which is a pseudoparasite that affects halibut and has been responsible for some fairly large die-offs in other species such as herring. To look at this in a budget sense, this is looking at what the research board assessed as high, medium, and low priorities across each of those stock identification, harvest policy, biology, physiology, and ecosystem interactions. The total for this year proposed is $329,000, of which the high priority represents about $222,000. This is just the breakout by priority. This is looking at the projects themselves. I know this is a little bit hard to read. It is in your documentation, in your briefing books. There are a number of projects here that are sort of wrapping up. One of them is the archival tag holding. We've been doing this for a number of years now, and we think we have what we think are acceptable tag mounting protocols for using the archival tags if and when they become available. We have to make a decision in 2015 as to whether we're going to wait for these geomagnetic tags or whether we're going to move forward with the newer generation of smaller tags using accelerometers. Tim Lors is our major staff scientist on this, and he probably has more ideas about this than anybody else who's been working with these tags in the North Pacific. But dealing with our supplier on this thing, we sort of get this perpetual promise of the tags being ready for deployment. We have had some beta versions that didn't work out last year, year and a half ago, Tim. We used those, I think. Yeah, they had some internal problems that the manufacturer has now fixed those problems, and they think they have a beta tag that's ready for deployment in 2015, but their research and development folks keep wanting to tag on more things into the tag itself to deal with bird tagging, because they see that as a bigger market than fish tagging. Anyway, that's a summary, Mr. Chairman, of what we're proposing for 2015, and as I say, if there are individual questions on researchers, they're here to answer those questions.
All right, thanks very much, Bruce. Any questions for Bruce from commissioners? Jim, then Don.
Just a short one. Do things like NPRB projects show up here on this chart, or is this Halibut Commission appropriated funds, or how is it characterized?
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Balsiger, this is totally internal funds. Yeah, this is not NPRB funding.
Don?
One facetious comment is that have you talked to the tide book industry to see how the length weight measurement study is going to affect the 47 million tide books that are printed? Because I have at least 5 in my truck and 3 on the boat, so they'll obviously have to go into the garbage. Okay. Let's see if I can find it here. I was reading in your the one study about stock identification monitoring assessment, and it referred to something, given the high success in sexing halibut with microsatellites. What is a microsatellite?
Dr. Lohr, I'm sure, would like to answer that question.
Thank you, Commissioner Lane. Tim Lohr, research scientist for those of you on the web. A microsatellite is a part of the genome that essentially sits in between regions that actually do things that code for proteins, and it's essentially just a garbage region. It offsets the various genes, and as a garbage region, it can pretty much be composed of anything, and over time it can change without affecting the animal in any way. And so there are these random bits of information that can evolve and morph over time quasi-randomly, essentially. And so they tend to be very good for determining population segregation, and that's what we are using. There's no reason to believe that the microsatellites are really associated with any of the coding genes, and so when you have these just sort of randomly aggregated bits of information, there's no reason to believe that they will be associated with things like sex, or that they will be very good at determining sex. I forget exactly what probability Lorenz, the actual geneticist, said that there would be of finding 3 or 4 of these things that indicate sex out of a couple dozen randomly selected in an entire genome. But it's an extremely low probability. And so the fact that we stumbled upon 3 of these regions that shouldn't really tell much, and they actually did tell a lot, suggests that if we look for regions that should give us sex information, we should have a pretty high probability of ending up with some really good markers that will really tell us the sex of fish. Hopefully that answered the question.
I think we all know more now than we did when you started. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Oh, Dave. Bruce, the 5th last item on there, what kind of hooks are those?
Oh, thank you. This is a work we're doing in conjunction, this is a work we're proposing to do in conjunction with Makah Tribal Council. Ed, where's Ed? Yeah, Makah Tribal Council. They are investigating the use of traditional halibut hooks as a potential hook for decreasing bycatch of other species. So the intent here would be to use these hooks on some captive fish that we have in the Oregon Coastal Aquarium that we're finished with using our tag mounting protocol research on these things, and these are essentially leftover fish, and these would be fish that we would try to use some of these hooks on it. They did some field work on this last year. They have actually had a very interesting process of learning how to make some of these hooks again, which they haven't made for some time, and it's actually quite an interesting study. It's fairly a low-ticket item, but it has the potential, they hope, to perhaps develop a fishing gear that might be more selective for species so they can get around some of the issues of rockfish bycatch in particular and Area 2.
Jim? The real question is, how do you pronounce it?
Chabud.
Steve, are there any questions online?
There's one question online from Philip Westenkopf. For clarification, Bruce, did you say you are reviewing the halibut length to weight ratio table for accuracy? The currently used ratios may be outdated and inaccurate.
That's correct, Philip. The intent there is to try to get an update on that thing, and if it needs to be looked at either seasonally or regionally, that's one of the things we're trying to understand.
Any questions in the audience or comments? Linda?
Good morning. Just really quickly, Linda Benkin. A question of Bruce of what information you're getting from the commercial catch through the observer program. In particular, I guess when you talked about trying to get some information on sex ratio in the commercial fishery, are you starting to get that kind of information from the observers who are now on the halibut boats?
Not to my knowledge. And that's a good question, Linda. I don't know the answer to that. My understanding was that they were not recording sex, but perhaps they are, and if they are, then I'm sure that information will be available to us. To my knowledge, they weren't, but I could be wrong on that. Does anybody on staff know? Ian says no.
No, you're not getting it, or no, you don't? Oh. Would be helpful, wouldn't it?
Say, Bruce, you made a comment that, given our discussion at the start of this morning, might lead to some adjustments of this. At least that's what I thought I heard you say.
Yes.
So we would be coming back at the annual meeting with potentially some adjustments?
The adjustments that would have to be made are not within any sort of funding avenue of the research program. So they would be readjusting. So we can talk about those in terms of staff tasking, but it wouldn't sort of show up in the research plan in terms of individual items that would be eliminated there. So we would discuss it within the terms of what are we trying to do within the MSE and what's the stock assessment going to be doing there. So it would be a sort of that level thing as opposed to a funding issue, but we welcome that discussion.
All right. Thanks very much, Bruce. Oh, there's apparently one more online, Bruce.
One more question just came in from Adolph Lewis. I think he's looking at your table, Bruce. Why does it seem the survey in the area 4C to E is a low priority?
I'm not sure what he's looking at, but the survey, the calibration survey in 4C to E is our top priority for expansion this year. I'm not sure I understand what the question might be getting at there. It certainly was one of our highest priorities that we identified for the expansion.
Maybe the first row, Bruce? I don't know.
Sorry?
Maybe the first row? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess the only one I can see here is perhaps the oceanographic monitoring, as you're suggesting, Paul, and that is a sort of medium priority with our water column profilers. That's not part of the survey of the Eastern Bering Sea.
Yeah, totally different topic.
Yeah.
All right, thanks very much, Bruce.
Okay, thank you.
The next item is the regulatory proposals, and I believe there's two of them that Heather's going to inform us about.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, I'll just go over that we've only received 2 industry proposals. If the computer would work. Page down. There we go. So we received 2 industry proposals. The first one is a recommendation of a maximum size limit for the commercial and sport fisheries. I believe it's for coast-wide. It didn't actually give a length for the maximum size limit. It said that the commission staff should determine that. And the second proposal was for the sport charter fishery in Area 3A. And it was to change the regulation to a requirement that the first fish that was 29 inches or less be retained. Currently, the regulation is that there's a 2-fish daily bag limit, and the first fish could be kept of any size, and the second fish, only a fish under 29 inches be retained. So it would be changing it so that if you catch a 29-inch fish, you would have to retain it. And the last one was just from a recommendation from California Department of Fish and Wildlife to be listed as an authorized officer in our regulations. We have a list of authorized officers, which are state agencies, and we would recommend that we add California to the list. There's some other parts if you want to read them. All of the proposals are online on our webpage. There are some other details, like in the second one, they talk about whether with catch and release and how many fish you could catch and release if the proposal went through.
Yes, a couple of questions, Bob.
Heather, with regards to number 2, the required retention of the first fish of 29 inches, have we forwarded that suggestion to the North Pacific Council? Because I know they're going to be deliberating this issue and then coming back to us with some recommendations.
We haven't at this point, but that's a good recommendation.
Any other questions? No? Are there any online, Steve? Any in the room? All right, thanks very much, Heather. So the next item is the conference board rule of procedures. Linda, are you going to be making the presentation? I think Chuck is online, is that right? Or going to be on the phone?
He's supposed to be on the phone, but we don't.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't have a big presentation for you. Just maybe an update on where we are with the rules of procedures for the conference board, if I could, and then happy to answer questions. We did tackle this issue at the request of the commissioners that we have a more formalized process, try to streamline what we do as a conference board. We had a committee who worked on this last year.
Could I just interrupt for 1 sec? Did you want to wait till we phone Chuck, or how should we proceed?
Up to you. Yeah, I'm happy to wait.
Might as well wait, and
okay.
Chuck can hear everything. It's all right.
Welcome to the phone.com conference.
You certainly are, Chuck. Can you hear me? It's Paul Ryle speaking. By the silence, I'm thinking no.
Chuck, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I hear you fine, Linda. Thank you.
Okay, great. Oh. Guess we just got to this agenda item. Your interesting little shape here at your chair. And I was just giving a quick update on where we are with developing these rules of procedure for the conference board. And if you want, I'll say a little bit and then let you add to what the update I provide.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay, thanks. So if you're ready, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
So we did have rules of procedures that were developed by a committee, largely a Canadian committee, who put the work in on that, and I wanted to acknowledge them. They did some great work. We brought this in front of the conference board last year. There were some suggestions for changes. We had hoped to finalize that at the end of our meeting last year, but we ran out of time to do that. So we have this draft that's in front of you now has highlighted in blue the changes that were made from what the conference board looked at last year. We hope to be able to get approval and formal adoption by the conference board of this version at the January 2015 meeting. So maybe I'll just see, Chuck, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, yes. Some of these highlights that were highlighted in blue, if it still shows up in blue in your draft there, we were actually amended at the conference board meeting last year as well. So there's a few more areas that we thought needed to be tightened up, and so we've made those. We presented those too, but they're sort of mixed in there, so it doesn't really tell you which ones were actually decided on at the meeting last year as amendments and versus what we've suggested as a terms of reference committee. And I guess we have to just be looking at that we're going to be using Robert's Rules as a guideline. I mean, it is there to govern some of the discussion, but we need, because of the complexity of working with such a large organization and 2 different countries, the chairs need to take some, I guess, have some authority on how we're going to discuss certain items, and one of them being the season or the catch limits that we think we've got to go back to sticking with likely discussing by area the catch limits, and instead of getting into a bit of a nightmare we got into last year. So we just have to work with this in the meeting, and everyone just works through the issues in a respectful way, which has been going on for years and years without terms of reference. So hopefully we've gotten it to a point that we can pass it, and regardless, there's also the last clause does give a path to amending the terms of reference if we run difficulties over the years. So we think it's ready to go, and hopefully we can get it passed this year. That's about all I've got to say, unless some specifics come up.
All right. Well, Chuck, it's Paul Ryle speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes, lightly, but I can hear you.
Okay. So thanks very much for all the work that went into putting together the terms of reference. And it's from the look of it, there's not too many additional changes that you have to discuss at the annual meeting. And with the objective, obviously, of getting this passed and approved. And so congratulate you and the others that worked on this and getting it done. I'll just see if there's any questions here by any of the commissioners. Don Lane has one, Chuck.
Sure.
Yeah, Chuck and Linda, Don Lane here. Thanks for this work. I'm just wondering your vision as to the last changes, number 9. Amendments, changes, and additions to the rules must be approved by the Commission. I'm just wondering the business cycle, I guess, is a better way to look at it. If so if the conference board decided that they wanted to change their rules of procedure, then it would be the next annual meeting on the Commission's agenda to approve those changes. I mean, it would be like a year lag. Is that kind of the thinking on that, so that those changes would be available for the next annual meeting? I'm wondering about that timing is all.
Chuck,
Go ahead, Linda. You can give your thoughts, and then I didn't catch the first part, but I sort of get the gist from the last part.
Yeah, maybe I just could restate it for you then, Chuck, that looking at number 9 changes, the question is if there was changes to these rules that were suggested by the conference board, would we suggest those that would then be adopted the following meeting by the Commission before those would become our official new ways of operating? And I guess I'll take a stab at answering that.
Sure.
I hadn't given that a lot of thought. I had, when I read it through, thought, well, we now have a little bit of a 2-step process, and that if there was a chance for, at the interim meeting, those changes to be adopted, so when we started our annual meeting, we had a chance to operate with new rules, as had been recommended, that would facilitate a better process than if we were sort of out of sync. But Chuck, did you have other ideas on that?
Well, no, but that's if a suggestion came to adjust our terms of reference at the conference board, and the decision was made to bring that to IPHC for their approval at that AGM or that conference board meeting, then fine, it could be done exactly as you said. However, there's a clause also, if it goes back to the terms of reference committee to discuss it and bring forth wording, then any business done between the conference board meetings has to come back to the conference board that following year to then be passed. And then it would be a delay. You're right, then, Commissioner Lane, there would be a delay of a year in that case. And that's on page 3 under conducting business between meetings.
Does that address your question, Don?
Yeah, thank you for that, Chuck. That helps a lot.
Bruce, you had a comment?
Yeah, this is Bruce Lehman, Chuck, and Linda both. In looking at the conference board report, I'm sure you spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I wonder if you could give us the kind of flavor of your thinking about the issue of minority reports within a section. It states in your draft terms that the minority reports are limited only to information and material discussed during the conference board sessions. Could you give us a feeling for the sort of hierarchy of how you would provide information to the Commission in terms of is the majority report here and there's any number of minority reports? Could you give us sort of the flavor of your discussion you had on that?
Chuck, would you like to go first on that, or would you like me to take that?
You'll have to go first on it because it was all broken up for
okay.
me, so I'll get my gist from yourself.
Okay. Well, the question was on what our discussion has been relative to minority reports and providing minority reports, and I'm sure Mr. Alverson might have some comment on this. It has been an issue in the past where we've had a discussion, we've had a vote, and occasionally minority information is handed to the co-chairs, and it's lengthy pages, and we've grappled with whether we should be including that in what we then present to the Commission. And so what we talked about last year was, if you're going to give us information, it has to be information that you talked about in front of the full board. So people have had it, it's been vetted, and that we may edit it down to what we think is the gist of that. But we will provide that minority opinion, just possibly in a condensed form and with those parameters.
Was there any discussion of multiple minority reports?
I don't know that you mean multiple on one issue? I don't know that we've had that happen, but I guess we would try to capture the gist of minority opinions, whether it was, 1, 2, or 3, hopefully not lots more than that, to provide to you in our report to you.
All right. Thanks very much to Chuck and Linda. I look forward to hearing the conclusion of your deliberations at the annual meeting. The other answer, I think, too, to going back to the original question that Don posed, it could be done at the annual meeting potentially as well. I don't think it has to be an either-or, meaning that if there were changes, one could consider them and still be applicable at the annual meeting. Might be something else to consider.
So if I could, so you're saying if something came up at the meeting, we could ask the commissioners take a look at that possible change right at that?
If it was done at the start, I would say that it could be done. I would hope that it would not be, and I'm sure you would as well, not wanting to be dealing with changes to terms of reference there, but I think it could be something that could be considered.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. So the last item today is the planning expectations for the annual meeting, and I think, Steve, are you going to deal with that?
Yes, I'm going to talk about that.
You are the last party in the conference.
It's the first one. Okay. Yep, ready to go. And this is just a brief topic. It's to introduce to the public in the public session the draft schedule for the annual meeting in Vancouver in the last week of January, so another less than 2 months from now.
The short version is that the schedule will look very much like the schedule of last annual meeting, one we just had in Seattle. So the public sessions will open at 1 o'clock on Monday, the 26th of January. The one change that has been made to the schedule affects only the commissioners and the staff, and that is that they will be considering some of the finance and administration business on Monday morning. But public sessions open on Monday afternoon, the 26th of January, and it will follow our usual schedule. We'll present the stock assessment and the harvest recommendations. In the evening, the two national delegations will be able to meet. Tuesday morning will be the second public session where we present things like survey expansion and some of the other business that we've talked about here today. Tuesday afternoon into Wednesday are the administrative sessions. So during those times are when the conference board and the processor advisory group will be meeting, and the commission will be meeting in administrative session. Tuesday afternoon will be the reports from agencies in 2A and 2B. Wednesday morning would be the reports from the agency or for the Alaska region. Wednesday afternoon is the commission's third administrative session, where they will look at the research plan, and then they have one Finance Administration Committee meeting later that day. Thursday and Friday look the same as they did last year, where the joint session with the conference board and the processor advisory group is in the morning, where the two advisory bodies present their recommendations to the commission, and then the rest of the day is spent in an administrative session where the commissioners are considering those recommendations, as well as any other actions that they're taking during the meeting. And of course, Friday morning is the last public session when the commission votes on the catch limits and the season dates and all the other business. So this will be posted on our website, and as the agenda is fleshed out, it will be, we'll keep adding to that between now and then. Also on the website is details for the meeting location, which is in Vancouver, and how to do hotel rooms and where it is. So subject to your questions, that's all we have right now.
All right, thanks very much. Any questions from commissioners? Done.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, I just want to be clarify for the public where they have roles. So I understand the public sessions, that's where staff will be making presentations to commissioners and the public, the reports that we saw earlier and additions to that. The administrative sessions will be where the commissioners are doing business, but the public will be able to attend. Is that correct?
Oh, that's correct. Thank you for noting that. All of the public sessions as well as the administrative sessions of the commission are open to the public. And at each of those sessions, there's opportunity for public comment and questions. In addition, just as we've done here, the public and the administrative sessions are also webcast, and we'll have questions and input from the web audience as well.
Well,
Mr. Chairman, we introduced this format last year, and I just encourage the public and particularly Peggy Parker and the chairs of the conference board to let us know how this interface is working. Kind of grade us and let us know if, because some of these sessions are coterminous with the ongoings of the PAG and the conference board, so there is some awkwardness there. Sometimes I think when we're making decisions, it may be of interest to either one of those groups. So if there's things that we need feedback from, I would encourage it from the public as well as the two primary regulatory boards we have, advisory boards.
yes, as you say, we introduced this last year, and I think we did hear some comments last year about some of the challenges when we have the multi different sessions going on concurrently, and that posed some challenges, but maybe they want to address that now. Were there any questions online at all, Bruce? No. Any comments or questions in the audience today? Bruce?
One comment. We would like feedback also on this. This is the first time in the interim meeting we've had a public session like this, so we're interested in feedback on how well this has worked, both with the web and the in-person thing. And Steve, would you mention also the communications survey?
Oh yes, thanks, Bruce. We have a communication survey open now for the entire halibut community, and we want your feedback on how well we get information to you. The survey, you can find it on our website. It was also in the news release that went out last week, and it's also been publicized on our Facebook and Twitter pages. So we're looking at your feedback, and the plan is for the survey to stay open through the 31st of December, so tell your friends. And we will have analyzed the results and present the results at the annual meeting about what we find. But some of the other commissions, notably the Salmon Commission, have gone through similar exercises and got lots of valuable feedback from the community as to their communications efforts. And we've made a number of changes in the last couple of years, and we'd like to hear from you about how that works.
All right. Thanks very much, Steve. And so I think that draws to close everything that we have on the agenda. I'll just see if the commissioners wanted to raise anything else. No. So I'd like to thank Bruce, your staff, and providing all the presentations over the day and a half. Lots of interesting material that's being well put together, and looking at what the stock assessment is indicating to us for 2015. And look forward to seeing everyone in Vancouver for the meeting in January to get together again and make some decisions on how we're moving forward with the management of halibut. And there's going to be, I imagine, some few challenging moments, whether it be around how we figure out setting the total allowable catch, what we think about making an adjustment to the size limit. Views on survey design are three that come to my mind, but I'm sure as in the past, we will figure all that out within the week and come to decisions by the end with advice and questions from the advisory process, but also from the public. So thank everyone for their attendance and time.